Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Max Slocum, Managing Editor of Tools of Change for Publishing, and just had a few opening notes here. As Catherine mentioned, we'd like this session to be as interactive as possible, so please do submit questions through the chat interface. I'll be keeping an eye on that interface as we go along and bubbling questions up to Laura. We'll also have a Q&A segment at the conclusion of today's webcast where additional questions can be asked. Just a couple of introductory things before we get started today. This webcast is in association with Start with XML, an industry-wide project to understand and spread knowledge publishers need to move forward with XML. The Start with XML Forum will be held January 13th, 2009 at the McGraw-Hill Auditorium in New York. Details and registration information are available at startwithxml.com. Today's presenter is Laura Dawson. Laura is founder and CEO of LJ & Dawson, a digital publishing consulting firm that helps book industry organizations strategize their digital initiatives, implement new programs, and position services for marketing. Laura has also been closely involved in the development of the Start with XML project. Laura, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Mac. I appreciate this opportunity to talk about XML workflows. It's something that's been a pretty hot topic for myself for the ideological company Mike Shatskin and Ted Hill, who is another consultant on the project, as well as Brian O'Leary, who gave a presentation, a webcast about POD just recently for Tools of Change. The four of us are putting together this conference in conjunction with O'Reilly as well as the Book Industry Study Group. And as Max says, the forum is going to be held on January 13th. So you'll probably want to check that out at the TOC website. So today we're going to talk about essential tools of an XML workflow. Given that you've already decided to implement XML in your publishing house, what do you need to know to get started with it? In terms of the topics we'll cover, prior to implementation, there are some things you'll want to do to position yourself. I just want to go over what some of those are going to be. I also want to cover how an XML workflow will affect your organization. Then we'll get into the common tools of the publishing workflow and how XML can support those. And after that, we'll dive right into the tagging rat hole. And lastly, we will cover some acronyms that you'll run into as you evaluate new tools. Where are you prior to implementation? You'll want to get a good picture of your current state. This means being quite realistic about your IT structure, how inclined your company is to embrace new things, what sorts of purchasing decisions are easily made and which take a long time, how scalable are your current systems, and how scalable are any new systems you're thinking about bringing in, and finally, what's the ultimate output going to be and how much of it will there be? In terms of questions you want to ask yourself and your company, these are just some things to think about as you move forward into an XML workflow. And these questions are also applicable to just about any sort of change management going on in your organization. You want to make sure that your database of products is complete. You want to make sure that your issues with versioning are minimal or can be solved by the tools you're bringing in. You want to understand how effective you are at meeting deadlines, what issues you've got related to content quality. It's essential to understand how easy it is to retrieve book content files once the books have been created. If you want to do anything with your backlist, how difficult is that going to be? Who holds the PDFs and the production files? Is that system working well? There are a number of publishers who store their InDesign files and their PDFs sort of offshore, and it's difficult to retrieve the files. How often and how effectively are you using your content to market or sell your titles? And how effectively can you publish in a lot of the non-standard formats that are becoming available now? So as you're moving through the workflow, I just wanted to show you a diagram. It's a representation of the nature of an XML workflow in a publishing organization. I apologize for the size of the font. You'll notice, though, that many people are working on things simultaneously. The handoffs between departments are not as pronounced as they might be in a non-XML environment. So your acquiring editor and developmental editor can work with the author at the same time. The author's at the top, the acquiring and developmental editors are out to the sides. Similarly, subrights, marketing, and production design staff can also work on a manuscript simultaneously for whatever they need to do. The content leaves production design and it flows outward into a variety of products, whether it's a hard copy book, a website, or an e-course, or an e-book. Each of these products may be slightly different from one another. The website might only contain excerpts of the book. The e-book might contain material that the hard copy does not. The e-course might contain material that none of the others have. But they're all derivative products from the XML file and all the tagging and collaboration that went into it. Mac, are there any questions at this point? Or are we good?
I actually have one question that was that bubbled up based off of the image that you've got up at the moment.
Okay.
And it's a broader question, and if you're going to be addressing this, please just let me know.
Sure.
But picking up on that slide and looking at the different folks who are involved in this system, do you feel that editors, artists, production folks are going to have to learn how to code in order to be able to do their jobs?
We will get to that. The answer is yes and no, of course. It depends. It depends on what type of publishing outfit you are. It depends on what types of authors you have. If you're a trade house and you're working with Nelson DeMille, obviously Nelson DeMille is not going to code anything. But if you are a work-for-hire writer and you're working for an educational publisher, they're probably going to give you a template and possibly a native XML interface to work with, and you're just going to have to deal. So it really does depend on what the context is, and I am going to get into the different roles within the organization and how close actual coding does come to them.
Okay, excellent. I think we're all set to move on. Okay,
great. So now I want to break it down and look how an XML workflow affects each role in the publishing value chain. Authors, while Word does have XML functionality, it's not ideal. Authors may need some very specific guidelines about how to format their manuscripts so that when you convert from Word to XML, you're getting what you need. It may be worthwhile in case where authorship is done on a work-for-hire basis, like I said, to insist that authors use a native XML editor. I know that O'Reilly does this. Authors should also supply lists of keywords for search and marketing purposes, and this is both on the book and chapter level. You're going to want to lead customers to the exact area of the book that's most relevant to what they're looking for. And also, it's helpful if authors work with their acquiring editors and developmental editors to decide what can be chunked or compartmentalized and syndicated separately. I'm going to get into this in a little more detail as well. Acquiring editors will have some new decisions to make in an XML workflow environment. They're going to be looking at a manuscript and trying to determine how many products they can get out of it. Can the content be spun out into workbooks and journals and calendars and one-a-day cards? Can the content serve as fodder for a website where fans can get together and build still more content? Can it be released as an e-book, as individual chapters, or iteratively? O'Reilly releases drafts of books before they're technically published so that users can offer feedback to the author. And those are the rough cuts. Developmental editors, these guys are heavily involved in tagging. They and the author and the copy editors have to determine what the book is about. They also have to look at what the acquiring editor wants to do with the content and confirm, is this passage, this chunk, is this the right one for the job? Can the content realistically be syndicated, or does it need more work? Does it need to be refined and compartmentalized? Developmental editors also find themselves in the position of having to enforce the writer's guidelines, the Word template or the XML editor that we discussed before. And then, of course, they're essentially the product managers for that title, coordinating with marketing and production and subrights. On a production level, the XML workflow is pretty concrete. Production editors are tagging for format. What's a chapter head? What's an index? What's front matter? They've got a predefined style sheet that they apply to the content. They're the ones working with compositors and rendering the different products from that content, the products that the acquiring editor has in mind. when she acquired the content in the first place. And for those of you who are curious about specific examples, I'm going to be getting to that a little further down the line. I'm just talking about roles and the way XML affects those roles. In terms of marketing, this is where the tagging gets kind of insane. Marketers are looking at the context tags that the author and the developmental editor have created, and they're coming up with appropriate audiences for the content. They're also working with the acquiring editor to create new products. They're assisting production with package design, and probably most importantly, given the current environment, they're investing in SEO on the book content so that the book comes up in Google and in other searches. In other words, they're making sure the content has the right vocabulary and keywords. With subrights, using XML and subrights allows you to store rights information, or at very least pointers to rights information, along with the content itself. This is huge. It means that you're not ransacking old contracts, you're not missing rights for things. You know by looking at the XML whether you have the rights to publish the content in, for example, EPUB or not. Mac, are there any questions at this point, or should we just keep going into the specific tools?
I think it's good to go into the specific tools. Most of the questions that come in tend to zero in on specifics, which I know you'll be addressing down the line. So let's just go ahead.
Okay, well, this is it. Common tools of a publishing workflow. As you know, most publishing houses use a combination of this list of tools plus some others. Obviously, authors and editors are using word processing programs. Some editors are still editing on paper. This will be a problem for them, obviously, as the industry moves forward. Designers are using style sheets and transforms. These are becoming more XML compliant by the moment. And then most publishers are using some combination of third-party systems that have to interact with one another in these tools on some level. So to get into the specific tools, and as we're doing this, keep in mind that what I'm presenting here is what we've discovered through interviews with a number of different publishers, as well as survey results that we've done in conjunction with the Start with XML forum. So this is all kind of ear-to-the-ground information that I've tried to distill into these slides. As word processing goes, essentially, sad to say, Word is the word processor of choice or coercion, so we need to discuss it. 2007 has XML export functionality. There are some pros and cons to this. The pro is that more people are going to use Word, so there's some consistency there, and you can build rules around the exports. But by not writing in native XML, you're going to have some garbled conversion. Microsoft is notorious for inserting extraneous tags and arbitrarily formatting things, as we know. So parsing XML out of Word is going to take some work. You could use an OpenOffice application that writes in native XML, like XXE. The downside to this is that you have to know how your document is going to be structured before you set down a word of content. Most writers don't think like this, and I know for a fact that most editors don't think like this. You also have issues around the learning curve of the interface. These applications are not exactly intuitive. Writers and editors are intuitive thinkers. My recommendation for most publishers who are not O'Reilly is to stick with Word and deal with the pain of the export, because otherwise you're not going to get much content generated. Are there any questions on that one? No?
No questions off of that, but there was a request as we're going through if there are particular acronyms that pop up, if you could just...
Yeah, I'm going to do the ERP DAM and DAD down the line. So, yes, we will get that.
Excellent. Thank you.
In terms of design, like Word is to editors and authors, InDesign appears to be to production and design folks. We're hearing more and more about the XML capabilities in InDesign. It allows you to either create or import a tagging taxonomy, edit the XML structure of a document, and export a pretty good quality XML file. Quark has to keep up, of course, and has developed similar functionality, though it's safe to say that Adobe is leading the charge on XML in the publishing environment right now. We haven't heard all that much about open source options, truthfully. I know that one attendee wanted to hear about that, but in all our interviews and information gathering for the Start with XML project, open source design tools have not come up once. So there's some room there for somebody to do some development. The third-party systems, an ERP system, enterprise resource planning system does, for publishers, essentially the finance and inventory. Title management systems do production workflows and budgeting and marketing. A DAM is a digital asset management system. So if you have graphics files, sound files, video files, cover images, illustrations, whatever, those get stored in your digital asset management system. A DAD is a digital asset distribution system, so your final digital files, how are those going to get syndicated out to Amazon, to Sony? The DADs are the guys who do that kind of thing, and they also distribute widgets. Most ERP systems and title management systems really have to communicate with one another, and Onyx-based feeds go a long way towards accomplishing this, and Onyx, as we know, is a form of XML. Onyx, for those of you who need that defined, is online information exchange, and that's a book industry standard XML flavor that allows trading partners to communicate bibliographic information with one another, and they're also used internally at many publishing houses for the title management systems and inventory. Many publishing houses are now installing digital asset management systems which tag digital assets with XML tags and use XML to structure metadata about each asset. DAMs also have to work with title management systems, so there's a lot of interfacing going on there. Houses that have large backlist files are sending those out to conversion houses, or in some cases, they're sending actual hard copy books to be stripped and scanned and converted to XML. The conversion bullet point is missing from this slide. I'm sorry about that. Finally, digital asset distributors are distributing XML content in the form of widgets and ebooks and other digital products. Mac, any questions we need to have addressed at this point?
There's a few technical questions that came up, and I'm not sure if you would prefer to, if you're going to be diving a little bit deeper into recommendations and specifics, but I can throw them out there. Yeah,
why don't we go ahead and tackle those now, because after this we're going to go into tagging.
Okay, absolutely. So there's a couple all filed under sort of a recommendations manner. First one is, what do you think about web-based editors in the future, things like Google Docs, Zoho, that sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, as we know, book publishing is a very slow to adopt sort of business. There are some obvious exceptions to that, but for the most cases, I'm thinking about the bigger publishing houses, and it's really tough to get them, even to move up a version of a Microsoft program as opposed to going to web-based editors or open source capabilities. So I really think we're stuck with Microsoft in terms of realistically dealing with publishing as far as the big guys go. Mid-size and smaller publishers are a lot more flexible, and I would trust Google to come up with functionality that could easily interface with XML applications. I really think that all roads are kind of leading in that direction, and they are very aware of that.
Yeah, that one almost feels inevitable.
Yes.
There's also a couple questions in regards to Word, and I believe this is mostly because that's such an important reference point for folks.
Yeah.
First question was, when you're talking about the author being involved in using Word as part of the workflow, is the impression there that you're trying to find a way of incorporating an established piece of software into the workflow as sort of a starting point rather than as a fluid part of a production process?
Well, I understand where you're headed with that. I just, authors, for the most part, trade authors particularly, are silos. They're going to do what they're going to do, and there's not a whole lot. You have to work around them if you want their content. If it's a work-for-hire author, essentially part of their job is to do things the way you want them done. So whether it's Word, whether it's another application, it really doesn't. It doesn't matter in that instance. Does that make sense, or am I completely missing?
No, and it sounds like there's sort of a psychological issue with
yes.
this.
And in fact, the bulk of an XML workflow imposition is psychological.
Right. I get the impression with things like this, you have folks who are ready and able to embrace that, and then you have 99% of the rest of the world which is ready to just do what they're usually doing.
Yes, and please leave us alone about all this. Yes.
Yes, which is pretty this is more dealing with it as you can deal with it. There was an interesting question in regards to if you know if there are any scripts that are commercially available to impose native XML rules on Word.
I haven't seen any in the research that we've been doing. Wouldn't that be great?
Yes, that would be wonderful.
Someone should invent that.
Yet another opportunity that's out there. And I would encourage any folks who are on the line, if you have things that you've run across, recommendations, that type of thing, please feel free to share it through that chat interface.
Yes, absolutely. I'd really love to hear.
Definitely. It's sort of the sum total of the information is really what we see as the benefit here.
Yes.
Along with, there was a mention of InCopy, which is the text editor companion to InDesign. Did you run across that at all in any of your research?
Authors and editors are not using it so much. Copy editors and production folks are, but developmental editors, acquisitions editors, and authors are not using it.
Okay.
In fact, they like paper.
I think that's a good segue into the rest of it.
Tagging, the rat hole, what it is and how to do it. Essentially, there are two types of tags. There are format tags and context tags, or if you want to look at it as structural versus content. Format tags describe a document, what's the chapter head, what's the subtitle, where does the illustration go, while context tags describe the content of the document, what it's about. Context tags are similar, the work that you put into creating context tags is similar to that of indexing. So indexers are very good at this kind of thing, and librarians. Who tags what when? Tagging is done pretty much all along the supply chain. Authors and editors are working on contextual tags because they're the experts on the subject matter of the document. Editors and production folks and design folks are working on structural and formatting tags. What's the output supposed to look like? Marketing is tagging SEO keywords and marketing keywords, while Subrights is obviously paying close attention to what portions of the content can be used, under which circumstances, and tagging accordingly. Here's the thing about tagging. It can all be done simultaneously. It can also be done iteratively. So you run a set of tags, and then you go back and you tag again. Tagging is collaborative, and like most collaborative efforts, it's chaotic. How to tag. You want to tag carefully. You also want to tag consensually. In terms of the care you need to take right now, there's no industry standard for tagging documents. There's no off-the-shelf program you can get where you import a document and then put a window over top of it so you can tag the various elements of it with context tags. InDesign and InCopy allow some of this with structural tagging, but it's not happening in the word processing programs. Context tagging in particular, it has to be done in native XML because that's the only place you can put a tag. The conundrum is that those who are best suited to the context tagging, like authors and editors, are the least suited to working in native XML. So the best solution so far is for them to generate the lists of tags and the locations where those tags should go, and then hand that over to professional indexers to do it in XML. Another problem is that there are no standard XML taxonomies for book content apart from the BISAC categories. The BISAC categories are great in Onyx feeds and whatnot for just identifying whole books, but they're not so great for identifying pieces of books, the chunks, the bits for syndication. Now, because there's no industry standard for identifying and tagging chunks, and because these chunks will ultimately be licensed to third parties who will also be accepting chunks from other publishers, it's important for publishers to communicate with one another about what they're doing. No publisher is going to corner the market on effective tagging by themselves. My own feeling is that there are going to have to be some industry standards built around contextual chunk-level tags, and the Book Industry Study Group is the body to do it. But meanwhile, publishers should already be talking with one another until that happens, which I know is a futile plea on my part. Mac, are there any questions about tagging?
Not at this point, but I imagine we'll have a few as we progress. So let's keep going and maybe zip back around.
Okay, sure. Oh, wait, I'm getting a little bit of chatter here about BISAC and BISG. BISAC is Book Industry Standards and Communications. BISG is the Book Industry Study Group. These are the standards bodies around book information. So ISBNs and all the different Onyx versions, all that flows through the Book Industry Study Group, and in particular, the BISAC committees. The acronyms. These are the acronyms you're going to run across as you evaluate all the tools that are out there. We're just going to go over 5 functionalities that you're going to need to know about as you move forward. Xpath, Xquery, XSLT, XSFO, and Schema Tron, which is not really an acronym, but you still need to know about it. Xpath is the query language. It selects certain tags from an XML document. So if a user just wants to look at the chapter heads, the Xpath query goes through the document, selects only the chapter heads, and it displays those and leaves the rest of the document alone. It's just a way of navigating through an XML document and filtering out what's not relevant. It's kind of like an SQL query, but for XML documents. Xquery is like Xpath, but it's for collections of documents in a repository as opposed to a single document. And it also uses some SQL-type syntax to supplement. SQL is a standard query language, which has been the standard query language for querying relational databases. Xquery crawls through multiple documents. It selects particular attributes, so it will select various tags, and it's very useful for combining similar tags. Say you've got 3 cookbooks, and you want to pick out all of the chicken recipes from those cookbooks. And Xquery will allow you to do that. XSLT is Extensible Style Sheet Language Transformations. These translate an XML document into a human-readable document or another type of document. It's used as a conversion tool between different XML schemas. So different publishing houses and, in fact, different divisions are going to have different XML schemas, and XSLT is a way of translating between them. It's also a way of converting an XML document into an HTML document, so you can take your basic XML document and convert it into a web page. You can, using a different XSLT, convert it into a plain text document. It just picks out the different tags within that document and processes them in a specific way that's predefined. XSLFO, is a style sheet language for formatting objects. It's a component of XSL, Extensible Style Sheet Language. The really important thing about XSLFO is that it's used to generate PDFs. Your books that are published now use XSLFO to create their PDFs, which are then used to print the books. It was really designed to format printed paged media as opposed to screen-based reflowable media. So you're not going to use XSLFO to do your Kindle books or your Sony Reader books. And then there's Schema Tron. This is a validation language. It uses Xpath to figure out certain patterns in an XML document. So it will help a DTD, an XML schema and ferret out all the different errors in the XML files. It's a support to your validations. Schema Tron rules can be converted into style sheets, and this makes the construction of XSLs much more automated. And that's the end of the vocabulary lesson. I've got some useful links here. So as we're taking questions, you might also want to look at some of these links. The Start with XML website is the first one. If you want to have a look at our blog, look at some of our research, and register for the forum. The Book Industry Study Group has a lot of information about book industry standards, and we were just talking about that. I have a newsletter called The Big Picture. You can sign up for free. I've put the link up there, and each issue has a different acronym, and we define it and talk about how that tool is used. Or if you have offline questions, my email address is right up there. So why don't we get into the online questions?
Okay, so we have a couple, and they're all over the place. So I feel like we can just take sort of a scattershot approach. And we have questions as we're going along. And folks, if you have additional questions, please send them in through the chat interface, and I'll send them along to Laura. First one, and I think this is an awesome idea if it doesn't already exist. The question was, is there an example of an XML tag book, preferably an InDesign one, that folks could look at? Did you run across anything in your
Nobody was going to show us one. You have to actually be working in a publishing house and go and request one. So, I asked Hachette if I could see one of their InDesign documents, and they were like, no. So they're very, very proprietary, and they're not willing to share, unfortunately.
So it looks like you'd have to do some digging internally, which is a shame.
Isn't it?
If any of the folks on the line are looking to take on a project, that would probably be a project that would gain quite a bit of acclaim.
Yeah, share.
Absolutely. Another question, and maybe we have a couple questions in this regard about production management and when you get down to the nitty-gritty of actually making it happen. But how many person hours per book does it take to add the appropriate XML tags to the average size trade book? And I realize that's a loaded question, and I realize that it's an open-ended question. In your estimation.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it depends on the subject matter of the book. It depends on the speed of the tagger, how experienced they are. It takes a lot of time, though. It takes an awful lot of time, and if you're going to do it well and do it right, tagging is a full-time job, and you have to be prepared to invest in that. What I'd recommend actually is just doing, like I was saying, iterative tagging. Tag for what you need now. You can always go back and tag for what you need later.
There was a question here about DocBook.
Yeah.
You can
we
explain
tried
what
writing the research paper for the Start with XML forum in DocBook, and we failed miserably. It doesn't have a very intuitive interface for those of us who are more word-oriented. It really is a learning curve. I'm sure that if I had stuck with it, I would have done a better job at it. But it's very, very good and well worth. If you're going to go in that direction, it does cut out a lot of the conversion issues. And yes, it does include schemas. It is full XML. It's a great starting point for the XML workflow process. But I guarantee you that most writers are going to look at it and go, "You want me to use this?" And you really have to find the ones that are going to be willing to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to reiterate with this, is that, and folks who do XML fully acknowledge that it is there is a learning curve involved, and it is not it's not a seamless process. It's a useful process, but not necessarily a seamless one.
Right.
Do you know of proofreading routines for tags? And I imagine that's some level of validation.
Mm-hmm. I don't know of any sort of off-the-shelf products Most of them are developed internally because the tags are developed internally.
And towards that, in regards to tags and embedding, do you know that if multimedia can be embedded via the XML process?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Video, audio, yeah, completely.
Yeah, it's a pretty robust process. There were a couple of, I'm just taking a look at the chat window, the conversations going on there, and in regards to the total number of person hours for tagging, there was a couple of great estimates there. John Florence had mentioned that it's 4 pages per hour for an education title, and Caesar had estimated it brought that question back up of around 100 hours for a 400-page book. That was posed as a question. That those seem, based off of my rudimentary knowledge of that actually seems pretty dead on.
Yeah. It's slow and it's expensive, but you know the alternative is how are people going to find your content if it's not tagged?
And I think if just to sort of go up to 30,000 feet for a moment to kind of discuss the reasons for all of this, and talking about how, and I know Mike Shatskin has labeled it as the Copernican change.
Yeah.
If you could, maybe just go up to that level for a moment and explain how going through this somewhat arduous process and having to deal with the learning curve, what the output can be.
Why are we doing this? Essentially, people are not picking up print books and reading them like they used to. They want to be able to zero in on specific content within books. And search engines are helpful with that up to a point. If you've scanned your titles into Google Book Search, that does help. But if you want a really direct search, then you've got to be able to point out to potential customers, okay, this chapter is about, I'm looking at my bookshelf trying to find an example. This chapter is about how to write a proposal for a particular type of grant that you're trying to get. What you're trying to do is guide people to specific destinations. You've got all this great content, and what tagging does, and the reason it's important to invest in it, is you've got to be able to get people to that information, and the competition around you is so great that your stuff is just going to get lost in the ether if it's not appropriately tagged. Does that make sense?
Yes. It
Okay.
does. It was a great question. Very direct. Who in the publishing process should actually use the native XML tools? I guess that would be more of who would be most comfortable using native XML tools.
I think, in the STM world, you can get authors and editors who would be comfortable with those tools. Production people, design people, and conversion folks and digital asset management folks would all be comfortable using these tools. And those types of tools, we were talking about them before, DocBook, XXE, there's Adobe makes it very simple, well not very simple, but reasonably simple comparatively. So it's, it's those folks. The more creative, verbal people probably wouldn't be all that comfortable using native XML tools.
Yeah, it seems like it ends up dividing along kind of job title lines.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah. And I actually had a question. This is just something that I've been pondering for a while. Do you feel that an XML workflow structure will lead to an inherently different structure within publishers, or do you feel that an XML workflow structure could be layered on top of an existing structure?
Yeah, it's the new wine in old wineskins problem. I do think there are going to be some functional shifts, just like there were when Onyx came on the scene. Suddenly, the product database assumed a different importance entirely because all this information was appearing on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. So, whole departments cropped up where none existed before. And I do think that kind of thing is going to happen again. Yeah, absolutely.
So it would seem that, and there's no timeline on this obviously, but it would seem that some jobs will potentially merge, some new jobs will appear, potentially some old jobs will either turn into new jobs or will disappear, just the nature of this.
Yeah, exactly. And I also see a really huge role for librarians, oddly, because all of this information has to be identified and organized.
Right, who better?
So that it can be found later, yeah.
Excellent question just came in. Can you explain the benefits and drawbacks of an XML first workflow versus an XML after workflow? And this is especially as it relates to cost.
Sure. In an XML after workflow, pretty much all your resources are being poured into creating a book, which will be sold as a hardcover and a paperback and an audiobook. But then you've got, the problem of, okay, I've got this book, now what? What if, it's really hot and I can create a lot of other products that go along with it? What if I want to distribute it as an ebook? Then you have to kind of go back to the original file and do conversion and tag it and figure out other uses for it. In an XML first workflow, you're acknowledging from the get-go that you are going to use that content in as many possible ways as you can. So, you've got all of these other components and all these different ways of distributing this content that are possible the more you push XML up the value chain. If you wait until the book is published and then you worry about XML, it's ultimately going to be more costly to convert it. You've got to then figure out, how you're going to sell it. You've got to re-engage your marketing people. It's just a lot harder. It's like you're reinventing the wheel every time.
And the justification for it isn't as
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And and there goes all your incremental income.
Yes, absolutely, which is really the entire point of most of this stuff.
Yes.
A couple of questions here. In regards to digital asset management systems, is this just a name for however a publisher chooses to manage the digital assets, or is there a particular recommended program out there that publishers should be set up with? And I don't mean to throw a curveball at you, obviously. It's not.
Oh, that's fine. I'm really comfortable discussing this. Digital asset management is a generic term, for however you're going to handle your files. There are several programs out there, and if you want, I'm happy to talk about that offline. Obviously making a specific vendor recommendation. It really depends on who, on the type of publishing that you're looking at doing. There are, dams like Telescope, Chuckwalla, and Artesia is another big one. Some are very flexible and designed for mid-sized publishers. Some are large and designed for your big guys. And I'm just naming names off the top of my head. If you want to talk about that more, I'm happy to do that.
Okay. I had a couple questions here that are address sort of the future-proofing opportunity and the concern. Question is, what about the risk of investing in technology that is rapidly changing and has little prayer for standardization at this point? Is there a potential threat for investing in an XML workflow?
Truthfully, I don't think so. The various tools are changing, and yes, we don't have a taxonomy for chunks yet. I don't think that that there's little prayer for standardization. It's just it's so new that things haven't been standardized yet. We're not really there yet, is the thing. I don't think it's risky to invest in XML workflows, however. XML is a very reliable language, and in the same way that ASCII is. It's not going away. And you're better off investing in that than not doing anything. And the only way to move forward is actually via an XML workflow. There really isn't any alternative that we've seen.
There was also a sort of a sub-question to that in regards to what basically becomes almost a proprietary form of tagging on a publisher basis, which would seem to me to be that's just something that's either it's totally dependent on the culture of the publisher. Would that be a correct estimation?
It is right now, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And it may change, or it may not.
Right, and I think, you know, it'll happen in the same way that the BISAC stuff and the Onyx stuff happened. You know, you've got these third-party vendors who are accepting data feeds from all these different publishers, and they're going nuts because nothing's coming in the same way, and they get everybody to the table and say, look, we can't deal with this anymore. Let's get a standard.
A couple questions in regards to the relationship between XML and web work, because I actually think this might be a bit of a potential reference point for some folks. There was a question that came in, what is the relationship between XML and the work that an information architect does, i.e. somebody who develops websites?
XML will feed into the structure that he's creating, an XML document or, you know, whatever components he's looking to place at the various areas of the website. It's kind of an open question. Is there something specific?
The question more on an elevated level about skill sets that may carry over from.
Okay.
So an understanding of structure and understanding, even though HTML and XML, they both fundamentally work on tags. XML is obviously more in depth, but that fundamental understanding, I think. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely you know, being able to work with tagging in any way is a transferable skill, and it would be less difficult for someone who's steeped in HTML to be able to pick up XML tagging. Absolutely.
Would you recommend that for folks who are taking their first baby steps into this, that doing some web-based work might actually help to even things out a little bit, or do you feel that it's just easier to jump straight into XML itself?
It might help, actually, for them to do some web work prior to jumping in. XML is extremely confusing. So yeah, it might help for them to work in a more structured environment first, and then they can translate, you know, what they've learned.
Yeah, even something like understanding what cascading style sheets does.
Exactly. Yep.
Separates structure and form from the content, which is sort of a fairly significant paradigm shift for the book publishing industry.
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah, it's like separating the music from the CD.
Yeah, exactly. Once you get that, the other pieces start to fall
exactly.
That was all the questions that I had. Apologies if I missed any that popped up. Oh, here's one that just came in, just under the wire. Any knowledge about use of XML in the business magazine environment? Maybe we could expand that a little bit to discuss things like magazines and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I know that the magazine division over at McGraw-Hill is looking at using XML in their workflow environment. They just gave a big presentation over at the MarkLogic Summit not too long ago. They essentially use very similar tools. You know, they've got. They were talking about interfacing K4, which amounts to their title management system, with the MarkLogic repository. So they're creating their books, or not their books, their articles in XML, storing them in this repository, and then outputting them using K4.
Yeah, and it would seem on a broader level too, it again comes down to that fundamental difference between content and container.
Exactly.
So It's regardless of if it's a magazine, a book, a website, all those types of things.
Yeah,
there was a question to XML editors.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, are these not suitable for book publishing?
Well, we did talk about them a little while ago. We were talking about DocBook and XXE, and they really, what I had come to conclude after the research that we did was that in some cases where you've got authors who you're hiring to work on specific projects in specific subject areas, you can insist that they use XML editors to do their work. You can't do that with trade authors, with novelists, with people who are their own brand and who will do or not do, whatever they want, because they're the content, and and if you want the content, you have to play their way. So it depends on the type of publishing you're doing and the types of authors that you're working with.
And I would imagine that there's a difference between external enforcement, so if you're talking about authors who are sort of outside of the space,
Mm-hmm.
and internal enforcement. A production staff, presumably, yes, would be using some type of XML editor.
Right.
There's an excellent question. What exactly is chunking?
Chunking is really, it's becoming an industry term. It's essentially where you are going through a whole book and you're saying, okay, this piece, this chunk of this book can stand on its own and be sold as a discrete piece of intellectual property. So if you've got a textbook and it's got a great chapter on, diffuse gases, and it can stand on its own in the same way a journal article could, then that's a chunk. And yes, it is sort of differentiated from the rest of the book in using tags.
Right.
There are no identifiers right now for chunks either, and that's a huge problem as well. So like we have ISBNs for books, we don't have an equivalent for chunks.
Right. The rest of the industry has yet to really catch up with that side. But that, again, might be one of those situations where taking a few baby steps on the web side,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that a little bit clearer by understanding, oh, okay, this is a segment that is defined based off of this tag. Because I think that, again, is another one of those hard to wrap your head around if you're not distinctly using it. And I also think that recommendation earlier about some sort of example that everybody could look at would really go a long way to helping people understand. Oh, yeah. That's what it is. Now I understand. There's a question about what is the difference between a DTD and a schema?
A DTD is a type of schema. A DTD is the data dictionary that travels along with a particular XML file and defines the contents of that file. A schema is a more generic term, and there are different types of validation. Just like we separate format and content, there are different schemas to validate the formats of files as opposed to the content of the files.
Great. There's one additional question here about, I think the broader question is about how to identify chunks. You mentioned it hasn't expanded.
Right.
Hasn't expanded. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a lot of them, and that's a whole other presentation. Really, truthfully, a lot of publishers are concerned about ISBN proliferation. I'm not so much. If you've got a database that handles, 100,000 ISBNs that identify each of your titles, identifying each of your chapters or what have you is not as big a deal as it might seem. Yeah, you're going to have data bloat, but a lot of that data is just copied and imported from other tables. The DOI, a lot of people bring that up, and it's got a very misleading. It stands for Digital Object Identifier. But it's really not an identifier. It's a pointer. So even within a DOI, you still have to have an identifier of some sort that says, okay, this piece of audio or this piece of text it can be found here and has these attributes. It still has to have a number or some kind of identifier in there that names it, essentially. And right now, the only tool for the job is the ISBN. And if you're going to trade that chunk, if you're going to sell it in any way, the mandate from the ISBN agency is you got to use the ISBN for that. So that's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a done deal, but the rest of the publishing industry isn't quite on the same page.
Okay, great. I think that addresses all the questions that came in. Apologies to folks if we missed any. Just want to thank you, Laura, for hosting today's webcast, and to everybody who participated. We'll be posting a full video from today's webcast on the TOC blog very soon, and you should be receiving a notification when that's up, but also keep an eye out. I'd also like to thank Start with XML for helping bring today's webcast together. Full details on the Start with XML project and the upcoming one-day forum, which will be on January 13th, 2009 in New York. That's available at startwithxml.com. So thank you all for joining us. And Catherine, if you had any words, feel free to take over.
I just want to say thank you to both you and Laura. Laura, that was so impressive.
Oh, thank you.
I was just amazed by you weren't stumped by any of the questions. So I want to thank everyone. If you want a copy of the chat transcript, the easiest way to get it is just to put your cursor in there, select all, and copy it. I think that Laura said that she will make the slides available afterwards.
Yes.
And possibly on SlideShare, is that?
Yeah, I'll do it on SlideShare, and if you don't mind, I'll also post it up on my website.
Oh, sure.
Yep.
Sure, that works well. And I will send everyone an email as soon as the video is available. So thank you very much for joining us. And
Great,
we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.